John, we are live. So, welcome everyone. Today, we will be discussing Bible lecture number 15, Joseph and the Coat of Many Colors. If you want to join us, you can join us at jordanpeterson.community. We have many discussions on the lectures on Saturdays, and on Sunday we record the podcast. So, let's get started.
Mhm. Is it jordanpeterson.community or jordanbpeterson.community? I think it might be B Peterson
It's,
because I think
it's
that's
jordanbpeterson.community.
okay. Yeah. All right. Cool. So let's see. Where's my notes? There we are. So a lot of what we talked about was how to try to achieve a similar character to Joseph, since that's essentially what the story is about, is the 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 power of the character behind, or the strength of character behind a person, and how by retaining that strength one can be able to surpass all of the limitations placed upon you. Um, and especially it'd be good to figure out a way to become a multifaceted character, as Peterson talks about, someone who's capable of being in a wide variety of situations while still remaining true to themselves, I think, and also being able to not necessarily conform to the situation, but be practiced or ready for whatever new situation that may come up. So, like being able to converse with blue collar workers, that and to also be able to communicate on an intellectual level with, say, professors. That's just one variety of a multifaceted character, such as Joseph, I think. Yeah, because Joseph, I mean, he's gone from prisoner to second only to Pharaoh himself. So to get at least closer to having the character of Joseph, we talked about how it requires taking small steps into just because I think we talked about this last week, how if you set too high of a goal for yourself, you'll constantly be uh, failing at it. So if you can place small things that are closer to getting you towards, say, the character of Joseph, or whatever high character that you hold to want to become more like, just take small steps, the smallest ones that you can be willing to do. So even if it's something small, just like a task that you don't have the desire to do, if you can break it down into, like, do I have enough willpower to do this smaller version, like just to pick up the book. But if like you're wanting to read more, then you can ask yourself that question: can I even pick up a book? Yes, I can do that. And you pick up the book, and then you ask yourself, can I read one page? And then you attempt to do that. And then working. It's funny. I think there's like a quote from some Netflix show. What is it? I don't know. It's some comedy show written by Tina Fey, where the main character says, whenever I'm in a rough situation, I just count to 10, because I know I can handle 10 seconds of anything, or something like that. And then she just counts to 10 over and over and over again until, I don't know, she's outside of that situation. It's something like that. I can't recall exactly, but yeah, just taking the first 10 seconds of anything and then just seeing where you can go from there, maybe. Did you have something to add, Sumit?
Yeah, so I ran into this when I was listening to Art of Manliness podcast. So, and it's been very useful idea for improving yourself. And the way it actually it sounds crazy the first time you do it, because if I look at past 3 months, like uh, daily, I have not probably meditated for more than like a minute, and because uh, that's the my mindset that I want to do it for at least an hour. So I have got this big goal, and then I cannot fit it into my schedule sometimes, and I just end up not doing it. And then if I was follow this Kaizen approach of making small changes to have a big impact, so I would say, okay, so I'll just meditate for 1 minute today, and that really sounds crazy because John, like what good 1 minute would do, right? Right? So
Uh-huh.
it's kind of sounds repulsive to me, like just 1 minute. But if I look at the things in terms of objectively, then I end up not doing it for the whole week. So in the whole week, I have not done it in even for 7 minutes. So now, if I was to do the 1 minute approach, then I can't exactly say to myself that I don't have 60 seconds. So then
Mm-hmm.
on per week, I end up meditating at least for 7 minutes, as opposed to if I came up with this really big goal, and then I just end up not doing it at all. And it is really interesting because I the same thing I was thinking about for the books. Like if I just read one page a day, I should be able to finish one book per year. But have I really done that? Uh, like since I was 20, let's say. But
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done that. So, uh, so on the Goodreads, I have only read 4 books till now, and uh, even those were I only read after joining the Peterson group. So you see, on an average, I have not even read one book per year. So it does make sense that you know uh, how you can start small, and what ends up happening is uh, later then like after a week or so you start craving for these things that you have been doing it for just 1 minute, because you when you come back home, right, you're like, where is that book I was supposed to read for just 1 minute? uh,
Mm-hmm.
and at times then I end up reading it for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or even 45 minutes sometimes.
Yeah. Like for myself, I've recently been attempting to like build habits within my routine, just of doing these larger goals that I have for myself, of doing a lot of different types of things like practicing an instrument and reading and drawing and meditation. Yeah, all these things. And I've been like trying to build a habit out of them, but they're they're all kind of too big so that I don't even have that habit formed yet. So if I can maybe break it down into something small and then like maybe set out specific times of day when I'll be able to flesh it out even after these habits have kind of grown, then yeah, just starting with small like micro habits maybe, and then be able to expand outwards from there would be very useful for me.
I have been reading a book on this, but the book I haven't gotten to the part where they talk about how to stop bad habits using the same approach. And yeah, so maybe that's something we can discuss in future.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. Um, all right. So one of the themes within the story of Joseph is better to be thought guilty while remaining innocent than to be actually guilty, but thought to be innocent, or even because I think it's even perhaps better to be thought guilty while being innocent, even more so than to actually be innocent and to be thought innocent. Because when you're thought to be innocent, then it, it might kind of give you a superiority complex over the people around you that are fallible. And it may even kind of create some sort of sense of delusion within yourself. Like if everyone always thinks you're this pure uh, person or just an innocent, perfect person, then you may start to believe their what they say, and so it might turn the smaller sense that you have. I don't know. I, I guess I really don't have a good enough understanding of this, but I still think it to be true.
Well, I kind of think that I personally wouldn't want to be in a situation where I'm innocent and people are thinking I'm guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because I don't believe I have the kind of talent that this individual in the story did, Joseph, to kind of get myself out of something like that.
Yeah. Well, even then, it's not like he got himself out of that situation. It kind of happened by chance or outside of his control. So even if no, it almost makes a point that even if in the case that you aren't able to get out of the situation that you're uh, the perceived guilt puts you in, that that's still better to retain your innocence while still being thought to be guilty.
For those of you who don't know, the story was that this guy is working for the emperor, and emperor's wife wants to sleep with him. And the point there was that he's a smart guy. He had to know that if he says no to her, then there will be consequences, right? She could accuse him of things, and but still, he rather than sleep with her, he just says he won't do that, and then that was really strange because um, I assume she was beautiful, and it must have been very tempting, and and doing the right thing here is going to cost him something. So, and he still
Mm-hmm.
does the right thing. So, and she accuses him of uh, what is it called, John, molestation, or what the word is, uh,
It's adultery
right?
between yeah.
So, and then the emperor puts him on in jail, and which was, I was surprised by that because I thought emperor would kill him. Uh, but emperor just puts him in jail, so he's innocent because, and he did what was the right, and what was in the interest of the emperor, and still he ends up in jail. Uh,
Mm-hmm. I don't think it was necessarily the emperor, but it was like I think actually like the prison captain or something like that. Whoever like owned the very prison system that he put him into. And I'm not sure if this is actually biblical or not, but I remember from a movie that's based off this story. It's an animated movie. It's pretty good, called I guess Joseph and the uh, Joseph Prince of Dreams. No, Joseph King of Dreams. I think it's an animated movie with I think it's Ben Affleck or Matt Damon that plays the voice of Joseph. No, I don't remember exactly, but at least in that story, I remember the like wife. Uh, she was kind of like trying to tell the her husband not to kill him, but to like put him just in prison. So in that case, she was like working somewhat on his behalf, but she was still the one that caused him to suffer. So yeah, I guess the story though is about when you're faced with two options of, say, he could have given in to her temptations and kept a secret affair between him and her, against his own boss and against her husband, or he could have retained his moral character and did not agree to her temptations and then suffer the consequences for that by being thrown into prison. The moral that it seems to be telling is it's better to retain your moral character than to um, break it and live in kind of a lie, or like stay hidden.
I don't think it is like that, at least for me, John, because I don't believe this applies to me or many other people, John. Like, I'm not saying if I wanted to do the right thing, I wouldn't do it. But uh, I mean, okay, let me put it this way. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
can you define what is better? Like, you probably end up in jail for doing the right thing. So that is not better. So are you saying better in the sense that at least you retained your sense of character or sense of doing the right thing? So you at least saved that.
I'm saying better in the case of those two binary options in that situation. So between laying with the wife of his boss, or to not lay with her, and then she lies about him, and then his boss obviously takes the word of his wife over the word of him, and so I guess even in the case where retaining your moral character is detrimental towards you, it's better in that sense than to break your own moral code that you're living by and that the people around you are attempting to live by. So because her being a wife, she has had the uh, agreed upon moral code that she had to uh, remain faithful to her husband. So by them giving in to their temptations, that breaks the moral code of both him, who like respects his boss and doesn't want to harm that relationship, even though it inevitably does because of her lies that she says about him. But yeah, so I guess better in the sense that of those two situations.
Like, but better only in terms of, let's just say, because let's just say if they cheat and no one really discovers it, then
Mm-hmm.
he's having fun, I assume, or she's having fun, and nobody really knows. And as far as he is concerned, uh, I doubt if she thinks it's immoral. So, I mean, in the first situation, nobody finds out, like, let's say so far, and people are having fun. In the second situation, somebody ends up in jail. So, what I'm saying is, Ben, that uh, doesn't the first option sound wonderful? And uh, because from the outside, let me put it, because you have to make this calculation from the inside, because it's what, like, Joseph felt that I'm going to do the right thing. Uh, Now I wouldn't know what he felt, but I'm just guessing that if he felt that he would much rather, like, face the consequences rather than break his moral code, then I
Hmm.
cannot see that from the outside, right? So nobody can. It's your internal feeling.
Hmm.
So when I said it's better for whom, because for me as kind of an observer, it seems that in the first option, both of them are having fun because sex
Hmm.
is fun, and in the second option, the poor thing ends up in jail. So I, as an observer, would have voted for the first option, I think, uh, because in the second option, I obviously, from the outside, can see that he ends up in jail. So I wouldn't want that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. Yeah, I see how better definitely depends upon what morality you kind of uh, hold as kind of the basis for yourself. So like if you have a utilitarian morality, then yeah, it would probably be better for him to be in that first position, or maybe even in the morality of what's best for the most amount of people. Like because that releases sexual tension between Joseph and the wife, and if it's kept secret, then there's no harm done. Essentially, uh, the the only harm that's done is something that's non-quantifiable, um, because it's something internal that is, let's see, yeah, it's the internal moral compass that Joseph himself had. Like, say you have a certain understanding. I mean, it's something that we like break all the time. Like, I can like have an understanding of just how detrimental sugar is for me, and so that's my own understanding of what is good and bad. And if I then eat sugar just for no reason at all, other than like this is something that I desire, then that's myself breaking my own internal moral compass, uh, in a very small way, of course. But you can just scale that same thing up, where if Joseph has the understanding that it's wrong to have an affair with another man's wife, and he goes about doing that anyway, then he's a slave to his own desires, in the same way that I'm a slave to my own dietary desires. And I guess another point of the story is that and Peterson brings this up, that one of the highest goods is to retain the moral character of the individual. So, and of course that's not something that can really be uh, understood exactly. It's very much, it's a completely subjective moral code to have to hold yourself to. It's kind of like I guess the Buddha's uh, description of the way, where it's you holding yourself accountable to whatever you know to be best for yourself and everyone around you. And so, like, if you break that, then you're just hurting yourself in the long run. So in the case of, like, if he were to give in to his desires and to sleep with his boss's wife, and perhaps he could keep it secret, there was still a an internal struggle between the ideal version that he's trying to hold himself accountable to, and the actual person that he is. And so, if in the case of that struggle, you kind of have two options. like in the case of Cain and Abel, it's really useful to think of anytime there's a story with like two brothers, to think of them as the same person, or at least, excuse me, two sides of the same person. So in the case of Cain and Abel, you could decide to throw away your moral compass, your idea of what the the best version of yourself is, or could be, and to like throw that away. So throw away your ideas about what's good or right or wrong, and then that gives you the freedom to continue on whatever pathway you desire, just in the same way being a slave to any of your desires, and just doing whatever you want because you've thrown away any idea of what's good and what's wrong and what's right. But I guess the one of the cases that the story is attempting to make is that it the highest morality is the one that's within our own subjective case. Well, maybe that's not accurate, because throughout the Bible, there's a lot of objective laws that are made, but in the case of, say, Joseph, that was very much prior to the objective laws being made. It was something that he knew to be something that he should hold himself accountable to, and by doing so, he suffered for it, obviously.
It's really
Yeah, sorry.
it's
Go ahead.
really interesting how they keep on talking about sex, sex, and sex. So it comes up in almost every of the stories, man. And you would think like, what's going on, right? I think part of it is could be that like John, it's the most powerful desire we have, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
the most persistent. Like normally, just you can't exactly control this thing. I mean, uh, it can be really powerful thing that can just overtake you and you don't see anything else. And you are talking about delayed gratification. So there is this marshmallow effect book by Walter Mischel, I think, and
Mm-hmm.
the children who were able to kind of postpone eating the marshmallow right now for two future marshmallows, as opposed to the ones who said, hey, we'll just eat the one right away, screw the second one, we'll get in the future. Uh, so they actually, the ones who could delay their gratification did better uh, when they followed them throughout their lives. So
Mm-hmm.
and so it could be that this story is showing us that to become the kind of character that Joseph was requires that you kind of have more than average control over your these instincts that at times can lead to really destructive behavior, and to give up today's pleasure for like future goals.
Well, I don't even know if it's that optimistic, really, because it's almost like a situation where you're damned if you do the right thing, and if you do the wrong thing, then you're able to keep that a secret. And of course, Joseph is ultimately rewarded in the end by being second only to Pharaoh, but that's not something that's known to him at all, and or known to any of us. And like in the case of Jesus, then that, he doesn't exactly have the physical success that Joseph had later after facing his suffering. It, there's there's always the possibility that your suffering will uh, be, well, let's see. There's always the case that suffering is the extent to how there's a possibility that you will not gain some physical reward for retaining your moral character. In fact, I don't know. Want to say it's more or less likely, because there's a wide variety of situations where it could be either way.
So delay gratification doesn't necessarily have to have reward for it. I mean, like, wouldn't you say that it's kind of about like what you choose to do? I mean, uh, when I like come back home, I guess it does have something to do with future reward. But I was
Mm-hmm.
just thinking maybe sometimes it's just about not succumbing to the temptation, and when the temptation is like so great as it was for him, so that's just one thing. Now a temptation kind of attracts you, right? And there are times you might feel that okay, so if I indulge in this temptation, if I eat that sugar, there will be negative repercussions for me. So then a temptation is attracting you, but the repercussions are kind of repelling you. But like in this case, uh, he had the temptation, and then the punishment also, which was working in the opposite direction. Like uh, one would think that not only he was tempted, if he didn't give in to the temptation, there is like an immediate punishment for him. And if he does give in to the temptation, then maybe eventually he will get caught or he will not. So uh, that just kind of requires an extra strength in his character to kind of still say no.
Mm-hmm. What's crazy about this story, and especially the stories in the Old Testament, because there was no real uh, promise of some heavenly paradise for after they retain their moral character. It's especially you can see in the case of Job, to retain your moral character. Well, there was the ultimate um, reward in the end, but there's no understanding of that going into your suffering. It's like Joseph did not have some sort of uh, reward motive in mind by retaining his moral character. It was, I do think that the at the end of the lecture, Peterson was at talk, was sorry. Somebody brought up a translation, I guess, kind of error, or at least a better translation for the case of Cain and Abel, to where Cain is saying that the punishment isn't. It's not like as we would read it today, that the punishment that God gives Cain is too great to bear, but the sin itself is too great to bear. So it's like, instead of thinking of the consequences to your actions exactly, it's almost thinking about maybe the more present feeling that it it's like thinking more in the present based upon how they're going to affect you. Let's see if I can articulate that a little bit better. Yeah, it's not like a delaying of gratification, since it's not like if he waits, then he'll be able to have sex with someone else. It's in that moment he would have to kill his idea of morality in order to live with himself, and it the I the story, I guess, is saying that it's better to not kill your morality, your internal idea of what is good, and to suffer the consequences for it, even unto death. Not necessarily in that story, but kind of all throughout the Bible, there's that caveat along with it, especially as we were talking about the book of Maccabees. That's a case where people held on to their moral character even after the torture of their children, themselves, and death. And I think the reason for that is it in certain cases it's better to die than to have to live with yourself after you've completely broken everything that you believe in, or like completely thrown away your idea of your ideal self. I do think that, like in the case of Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, after you say to hell with it and you do something that's unforgivable, then you'll be in misery. You'll be in a psychological hell, and you're so. Yeah, it's almost better to have had died prior to giving in to temptation than to continue to live but still be in this state of utter misery and hatred for yourself. And I think there's still certain cases where people are in that state of misery, that hatred for themselves, and there's no escape. Like in the case of Cain, where he had no way to get out of that hell of his own design. And based off of the ending to Crime and Punishment, I do think that the freedom from that personal hell is to have some sort of reminder for what is actually good, to give you a renewed understanding of what is moral. Maybe it's even a better understanding of what is moral than what you've had previous to that. And then maybe coming to the conclusion that despite your flaws and despite hating yourself, there's something that can be done so that you can return back to the good. And it's not a good that's within yourself, because you already know how you've sinned and you deserve to live in hell, essentially, for what you've done, or at least you deserve that mental anguish of self-hatred for breaking your own moral compass. To devote yourself towards a true innocence, that or a true good that you've been reminded of. Like in the case of Raskolnikov, it is Sonia, who is this altruistic figure that lives for others and takes on suffering in order to do what is right, and that like renews his capacity to see good in the world, and over time to be able to get a new sense of good within himself. And I do think that, psychologically speaking, that same outcome can be had through the example of, say, Christ, because if there's some sort of reminder of what is good and pure, and the suffering that occurs to someone like that, it's it kind of places you in a point of responsibility to not allow that type of suffering to happen again. And I think you can like say the same thing for Socrates. Through his Socrates' death, um, uh, by attempting to do what he saw was good, like the state of Athens, or the state of Athens, like punished him exactly for that reason, and other reasons along with it. But something that he was like innocent within his own morality of. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, ask me a question. Um, yeah, in the case of Socrates, his death, I think, also probably in the case of Jesus, leads a revolution to cause common folk, or not even common folk, but like sinners to have that renewed ideal that they can strive for, and to work for, instead of like working for their own self-interests when they know they don't deserve. Like if you do something that you know to be wrong, you know that you don't deserve a good life because of that. There's this inner morality that you know that people deserve to be punished for wrongdoing. And so if you're no longer working for yourself, but for the benefit of somebody that uh, uh, deserves all of the good, then perhaps that's a step out of nihilistic self-hatred.
I remember we were talking about this situation where those Roman troops, were they Roman troops who were asking them to renounce their faith?
Yeah, that was in the book of Maccabees. I think it's the Romans. They were yeah, trying to get the Jews to renounce their faith, and to live in the same manner as the Romans were, and so to sacrifice to idols, to live sexually sexually immoral according to the own Jewish beliefs, and to just throw away all of their past traditions that they've been holding themselves accountable to, and to, yeah, to live in the same secular manner as I think it's Romans.
Let me give you a kind of an alternate situation. So
Mm-hmm.
let's just say you are somewhere in Syria and ISIS moves in, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you know ISIS is into this sex slaves trade and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So they say like they kill everyone, okay? And they capture you with 10 other people, John, okay? So and you are pretty young guy, so they say, hey John, like we could use you, so you can like either join us or die, but if you have to join us, uh, f- so you have to prove that you are kind of worthy of joining us. So you first have to rape this chick, and then you have to kill her, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you have to decide between dying and rape and murder. So uh, so is it possible? And let's just say that you take the second, just to save yourself, you take the second approach, right? So you are talking about this that afterwards this character, right? Uh, he kind of hates himself. He goes into this self-loathing loop, and so that's one way, but I'm saying like maybe there is another way, John. Maybe like when you kind of decide to walk on that path, John. So
Mhm.
you are kind of waking up the worst nature of yourself. And remember how Peterson was saying that if you don't think you could have done all those bad things that Nazi people did, then you probably don't understand yourself all that well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is when you do those activities, so which is like rape and murder to join ISIS, then you perhaps are killing that part of you, who was good, and you are kind of willingly joining evil. So in that situation, you wouldn't exactly feel guilty because you kind of have given control to this really, really dark side of yourself. And hell, you might even start enjoying it and become one of them. So in that situation, I suppose you wouldn't feel the guilt.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a battle inside yourself as well, uh, between these two things. And uh, I'm inclined to think that once you are in an internal battle like that, uh, death might actually become less scary, John.
By
Uh,
giving in completely.
no, 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 no. What I'm saying is like, if you consider this possibility that I raised, that you turn to the most dark side of yourself and then do rape and murder, and all of a sudden you are initialized. Now you don't know, John, how much harm you can do because you perhaps have never really done real harm. uh, Remember how they say like it's more easier for me to do what is right 100% of the time rather than 99%. Or uh, we had this early discussion about there is something about that first act of violating someone that you do, and after that you lose something, and then it's easier for you to do it the next time, right?
Hmm.
So what I'm saying is when you are faced with a decision like that, so and if you consider the possibility that you might choose a path where you turn to the most dark side of yourself and kind of wipe out your other character, so if you move back one step back, then at some point you have to decide to do that. If you move one more step back, then you have to have some disagreement between the good part of you and then the bad part of you, right?
Hmm.
So that's kind of an internal battle. So if you take that battle seriously, right, you might win it or lose it. That internal battle I'm talking about, John. So you might win it or lose it, but if you do kind of end up winning it, uh, then you are really kind of aware of your own internal reality and how scary that can be. So I guess what I'm saying is, uh, after having won that battle, death might actually not be that scary for you.
So I'm not sure I understand. So, like you've won the battle after you've like raped and murdered, and so
No, no,
you've.
no. We were going back in time. We were going. Since it is possible for the other side, the dark side of you, to win the battle, then you will rape and murder, right?
Hmm.
Then, if you go back in time, then at some point, the good part of you must have been in charge,
Hmm.
because earlier you were willing to like not do that,
Hmm.
right? You are not a rapist and a murderer. Then a choice was offered to you whether uh, you had to choose between dying and raping and murder, right?
Hmm.
Then you decided to take this path. So there must have been some internal conflict, right?
Hmm.
Whether or not to take that. approach to
Yeah.
save your life. So if you win that internal conflict, I'm saying you you might you might be able to face death with some kind of dignity. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay. So after you might be able to return back to the having the good part of yourself in control because you've had that before and you can return back to that.
No, no, okay, okay, lad. All right, all right. We are just. I'm not able
Yeah.
to make you
Sorry.
understand this. All right, all right, all right. So when once they offer you the okay, let me put it this way. Remember how Peterson talks about how Ayn Rand's characters they are so perfect.
Uh-huh.
ISIS comes to them and says, "Hey, you will either die or you'll join us." They say, "Hey, fuck you! I'm not
Mm-hmm.
joining you. Bring it on." So so those are the kind of characters we have. And Peterson says,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, what the hell? Like, there is no internal conflict going on within these characters. They are just so sure of what they are doing." So, according to him, the really profound literature would be the one where the protagonist has got the villain inside himself. Uh,
I
so
see.
So there'll be some good people who will just write out, tell the ISIS to go fuck yourself, and then they will die,
Mm-hmm.
and they will probably be saying, "Bring it on!" like on those Hollywood movies, right? So even when they are facing death, they say, "Hey, bring it on!" and then
Mm-hmm.
some slang. So, and then you would have people who would be willing to do anything to survive, and um, then you would have someone who is seriously struggling to make a decision. So, uh, struggling with the dark side of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I'm saying is, like, in that situation, you really get to see the uh, dark face of yourself, because the people who are like so good or whatever they are, so
Mm-hmm.
they just decided not to do it. So they just decided to face death for some reason, and other folks they just joined them. It's only you who really struggled with the evil and really contemplated what you yourself are capable of doing. And in the end, if you kind of win that internal war and say that like, yes, there is a part of me who would much rather join ISIS to survive and engage in these horrible acts. So there's a part of me to whom all these things appeal.
Mm-hmm.
That part find appealing, but still, like, you resist and you fight and you kind of win. So what I'm saying is, then for you, uh, death might actually not be that scary a prospect, because you literally have been doing battle with the devil, and you kind of still decided to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's that idea about uh, like, be afraid of things that can destroy your soul
Mm-hmm.
and not the body. So if you are victorious in that battle, then uh, it might be that after that you are much more like fearless in the face of death.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a kind of something I'm thinking about, because you are the only one who have fully contemplated the alternative.
Yeah. So a real act of morality is, or it's a more, I guess, moral person who is able to contemplate evil, but yet choose to do good instead of somebody mindlessly. choosing to do good without actually even being tempted by it.
What I'm saying is that person, you can't fuck with that person. Like you are not breaking that son of a bitch. That's what I'm trying to say. Like when you say, hey, we'll probably kill you, so he'll be like, okay, uh, like I have just been battling the devil for last 30 minutes, and you are saying you will kill me.
Mhm.
Okay, that's interesting.
I think this whole lecture and like the story and the conversations we've had is definitely opened my eyes to a better understanding of morality. I think, or at least of the morality within maybe the Bible, and maybe because there's like many different ways that you can quantify what's good and bad. You can base it upon what the overall um, objective outcomes have been, and so on. From uh, you can base it off of kind of subjective positive feelings, such as like pleasure versus pain, like what leads to the least amount of pain or suffering. Uh, but in this case, it's contrasting. Yeah, it's like an internal suffering that isn't it's very much a mental state than any actual objective basis. And I don't know. Maybe I haven't considered all the other options for morality uh, exactly. Like I need to read Sam Harris's The Moral Landscape just to at least get an understanding of the case he's trying to make based off of well-being and whether or not well-being would entail actually something like this, like because I don't know. It seems to me that morality requires a foundation within subjectivity, um, because you could live for 100 years and still hate yourself and hate your entire life, so that it would. It seems to you it would be better to have not have lived. But you can also live a short life, and it's almost a greater mercy to die in your without breaking your own moral character, or and without having to hate yourself for a long period of time, than to uh, yeah. I don't know. These are all things I'm still definitely struggling with, but it seems to be that the people that we hold in high regard are those that did what was right despite the detriment that it led to within their own physical selves, and especially those that did it without a like projected beneficial outcome for themselves, like it's easy to do good when you have the belief that I'm going to be sent to heaven for this. It's probably harder to stick to. Well, maybe that's a reason why heaven has become such a you, useful uh, story to tell ourselves, because it gives us the relief or gives us the greater capacity to for maybe common people to do what they see as good. But I don't know. It's also given certain people the capacity to do things that are uh, quite undesirous in the hopes for gaining uh, great reward in the afterlife. So
Yeah, I doubt if it is possible for us to understand these people, man. Uh, if ISIS offered me that choice, I'll probably surrender because they are scary people, man.
mm-hmm.
You don't have to screw with them. So somebody who could stand up to those folks, I mean, I I doubt if I can understand that person.
Yeah, especially someone like Joseph, who I don't know. From the story, it almost seems like he's somewhat naive in his actions, especially like with his brothers and stuff. And then he gets shipped off, and maybe that naivete is quite useful. Um, I think that's the all the main points that I have gotten.
No, there was one more point we discussed
Oh yeah.
about how there will be times when you will not have enough. I don't know what his motivation was, one of his brothers, but it raises an interesting. It brings up an interesting point about how there'll be times where you'll be kind of outnumbered by evil, and you will not be able to stop them. So the best you can do is like give them kind of a less evil
Hmm.
possibility with which they can actually benefit more, kind of like he says, hey folks, like we don't really have to kill him, maybe we can sell him as a slave and earn money from it. And these people are like, cool, cool, great idea, let's do it.
Oh yeah, that really brings up a whole new kind of can of worms to try to compare between the two of utilizing evil to gain a better good. It's hard to compare those two, I guess, since it seems like depending on the situation, sometimes that will lead to a good outcome, or like if what was it, Reuben, say, was somebody that had that same strength or moral character that Joseph had, and he was like, hey, let's not kill him, and instead of coming up with that compromise, that kind of situation of, well, I don't know, they had the idea of killing Joseph, and then one of them brought up, what do we gain from killing him? Let's instead sell him into slavery. I don't know if he was doing that out of as a sort of compromise scenario, or out of his own greed. Because there was his other brother, I think the eldest brother, who said, let's just throw him in a well, and then with the plan of coming back to save him later. Uh, but he wasn't able to do that because they instead sold him into slavery.
Regardless of his motivations, it does bring to our notice an important tool
Mm-hmm.
of not confronting the evil directly. because you're then fighting on a totally different ballpark. Uh,
Hmm.
so the argument you would make against evil is that it is wrong, this and that. So you're kind of entering into a direct conflict of values. Instead, this guy's kind of bringing up other things, like, uh, hey people, how about we make some money?
Hmm.
Or there is always this fight going on, and uh, some guy comes in, and uh, he knows that the other person who is losing is right, and just to save him he would say, oh, just let it go, he's a total fool, what does he know, right? So it's kind of diffusing the situation like that, and not really making a stand for anything, so in a way that person if you use that this tactic in a way, you can also do a lot of good.
Hmm.
uh, like if they are about to kill someone, you might say, right, we could kill him, but like, uh, we also need workers, to do some of the dirty work, so maybe we can let this guy live. So uh, so that way you are not exactly calling the evil out, you're
Hmm.
just kind of working with it to do some good.
Yeah.
So, so I guess that strategy can work if you are part of the group who is like doing evil, and you as a one person cannot exactly change the minds of the whole group. So you kind of keep on giving them suggestions which are like least destructive.
Yeah. Those are very two great types of morality to try to hold yourself to, of trying to mitigate the as much suffering via kind of using the interests of those that are trying to inflict suffering, or even just like working with it. It's not necessarily a compromise, but it's like working within the interests of each party to at least help them get to something better than the the intended, or the original plan. So I guess that's technically a compromise, but compromise is used in kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just my mind of a kind of uh, dirty word, especially in regards to morality. To have some sort of like compromised morality is very much a bad thing.
It sounds like an excellent tool to me, John. Like,
Yeah.
let's just say you were in that place, like that movie Quentin Tarantino made about slavery, and it's he was like, these slaves are really getting tortured, man.
Hmm.
So like, wow, it was horrible stuff, and uh, you can't exactly stand up and say, hey, slavery is wrong.
Hmm.
Like, it's that's like innovation, standing up and saying slavery is wrong. That's like you are innovating like 100 years maybe. So right, so rather than do that, um, you might say, hey, why are you beating up the slave? Like, I need this guy tomorrow to do work in the field, so I lose one, I'm losing one worker here. Are you nuts? So that's a very different kind, that's not exactly a moral argument, and it doesn't exactly kind of, because if you stood up and said slavery is wrong, then you are kind of entering into a serious conflict with these people, because you are then uh, kind of questioning their fundamental values, and that's not going to go well. uh, so instead, you can just try to uh, work with them and come up with the least evil option.
Yeah,
uh,
because
no,
uh,
Now
I,
that
I,
doesn't
I
take away the innovators, right? It's the
hmm
difference between making change in small increments, like we were talking in terms of your personal life, right?
Hmm.
As opposed to someone standing up and saying, hey, abolish slavery immediately. So that is also useful. I'm not saying that, but that's not for everyone.
Hmm. Yeah, because not everyone has the same moral character that you do. I mean, being raised in different scenarios, we're all going to be having some sort of different ideas of what's kind of right and wrong. And I think that, yeah, you bring up a great point that there's the better outcomes that can be used by, instead of having to rely upon the strength of the moral, or the moral integrity of other people, but by utilizing their, uh, I don't want to say selfish interests, but I mean selfish in, I guess, the Randian way of their own rational self interests. By utilizing that, you can get better goods than maybe if you were to die. That's a great argument between the two. Because I don't really think that slavery was ended through the moral argument. I think it was only able to end because of it being a detrimental strategy for the people, because it was just, I mean, through the revolution, industrial revolution from the north, that's what really kind of put a dampening on slave owning. It's like our we're only capable of being so moral. Uh, like we have this like limiting factor within ourselves, and the only way that we can, well, I suppose there's two ways we can kind of go about the way of those that have died for, in order to hold their moral code, or we can try to mitigate that by maybe creating a better solution. Maybe it's kind of like, depending on the situation, there, like some situations there's not going to be that potential, like there's no way that you can create a better solution, or some, like maybe the opposing person is steadfast in their in wanting to do evil, like you can't rationalize with them at all. And so if you're faced in that situation, maybe it's better to not compromise your character, and to uh, suffer the consequences to that. And in other situations, you can try to reach their rational self interests, and come up with a better solution than the one that they've proposed. I don't know which one's better though.
I was thinking it would be opposite. Do you make an interesting point? I remember reacting to people. Uh, I remember now. I implicitly follow this principle.
Which one?
That if you are like running around beating people up, and doing all kinds of destructive things, right? Uh, someone who is really, really, that kind of character you described, then I'm like, okay, this guy needs to be stopped, man, at any cost.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but if you deal with kind of a character who is kind of less, arrogant and all that, uh, maybe you think you can just kind of try to come to some kind of understanding. But when you are dealing with the kind of character who just won't listen, and uh, and who won't let you speak, then and he's doing bad things, then what option have you left with, John? So you are right.
Yeah. And like in the case of Maccabees, also that brings up the other option as well, where when they were capable of it, the family of the Maccabees went out and like killed all the people that were tyrannizing them. So that's the other, I guess, option that when faced with those types of situations. Well, I guess I'm much less steadfast in my moral understanding, but no, at least I have a better understanding of morality within the the character of the individual. It seems like a very good thing to be uh, to hold up as the highest good, is to retain that morality within, and maybe in the cases of also being able to share that morality within, so that maybe you can come to a finer understanding of like you might have the assumption that um, slavery is good in a way because it benefits the slave to live a life that's better than they would have had previous to that, and so that may be why you're uh, morally good within your own internal character of being a slave owner. But if you're open to discussion and being shown how you're incorrect in your assumptions, then you can have a better understanding of what is good within your own mind.
Yeah,
So
I
like,
never thought about that.
yeah. So like our morality is continually evolving still.
Wow, man, you people say the kind of things that I'll never get to hear. uh, because I always heard slavery is evil, this is bad, but it does make sense what you're saying. Maybe people who had slaves were not a bunch of assholes. uh, I mean, uh, like they were at a certain point in history where you had that kind of environment, like even if you were the good slave owner, what the hell you are supposed to do? Free them, and then what will they do
Mm.
in a society that is kind of hostile to them, right?
Yeah, it's interesting the I guess evolution of slavery, because it, in the harsh past there was a time when people would uh, take their armies and kill everyone within a city, and then there was the more not really liberal, but I guess the more progressive moral figures that instead of killing everyone within a city, they would take those people as slaves. So in that situation, slavery is a morally better situation than the than the currently used method. And then now, like of course, slavery is the less morally good situation that we have now, and yeah, I do think that within our history, the things that we now consider as morally reprehensible were necessary to achieve the place that we are now in a way that we have to comprehend and strive to still continue to do better in the same way that we've morally outgrown slavery. There's more things that we still have yet to morally outgrow.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. If you look at the arrow going from past to the future, you understand this stuff. But if you look uh, from the arrow going from the present to the past, uh, you see all these people still talking about slavery and saying how bad, evil this country is and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, but yeah, I do get it. I mean, uh, essentially, what you are saying is it's possible for a slave owner to have a good moral character.
Yes, uh, in regards to the location and the time that they are present within. So it's very easy to look back upon even the most good slave owner and see that by our current moral standards, they were still bad because they owned slaves. But we're in very developed countries, so there's a system of development that needs to occur in order to reach that high ground, really. And it seems silly to try to hold the past accountable to what we now see as a better good, because by their own understanding, they had no capacity to yet know that, perhaps. Or it's not like capacity. It's like, well, capacity in the sense that in order to live, there was a almost necessary master slave um, relationship that, in the same way that we kind of have. Never mind. I don't know.
Yeah, that does remind me of this case where you saw the interview of that guy, that
Which
Tour de
guy?
France guy on Joe Rogan podcast.
Uh huh. I
That
think so.
famous guy who had testicle cancer in his testicle and he won Tour de France many times and then he was doping or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lance Armstrong.
Yep.
So he just took a lot of hate and took a lot of heat from a lot of people, right? And that was a really interesting interview because in that interview, the Joe Rogan person didn't actually accuse him of anything. Like they were just having a normal conversation, and I was surprised that people can have that kind of conversation without pointing fingers at him and saying "you evil sob."
Mm-hmm.
So, and he was saying that, "Hey, I was in a situation where everybody did this stuff," and He was talking about how there were other people who did it and they also got caught and they didn't catch hell for it. Somehow he is the favorite target of everyone. So I mean, it happens. Not that what he did was right. It's just that the context in which it happened, right? Uh, where everyone else was doing it. So people perhaps uh, start judging before properly looking at the situation in which that thing happened.
Yeah, it's yeah. It, there are certain situations where everyone is kind of all doing the same thing, and maybe keeping it a secret just because the people outside don't understand exactly their reasons, or the necessity of what they're doing.
Hmm.
I
I
don't
really
know
like to
how
you,
to deal with that
yeah.
situation though.
Hmm. No, it was not a question. I just it reminded me
Mm.
of Lance Armstrong situation.
Mm.
Uh,
All right. Well, I, I, I'm at a kind of place of confusion, or at least like not really sure where to go from here. But it has been very interesting, definitely, to at least talk about all these things.
yeah, maybe we should put the slavery discussion in a separate video.
I don't know. Maybe
Yeah, but why are you scared of the liberals?
I'm not scared. It's just I don't have a good enough understanding to really talk about it with any sense of authority or comprehension.
Oh no, but your point was indeed a good point, right? Like judging people with that incomplete understanding of things.
Mm.
Because I had not heard this before, the way you put it.
Yeah, I think that culture it relies upon its own understanding of things. So, like, if you're within a culture where slavery is all throughout, then the very notion of it being a bad thing is kind of ridiculous, because by definition, bad is something that is like detrimental to culture, or well, I don't know. There's many different ways, I guess, you can try to define bad, but that's at least one way that you can define bad. So the mere statement of that would be silly to anyone within that culture, where even the slaves within it recognize that this is a necessary part of society.
Yeah, I think that reminds me of the case where like the culture as a whole has to change because like I live in India and even today like I don't know I don't know all these fancy words but um, it's about some particular gender roles, role of man and women, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I might have more progressive opinions on that, uh, but then I might end up doing certain things that you would say, "Oh, I thought you wanted to do this a better way, Sumit," and I'll be like, "Yeah, but you don't understand the whole like culture thing is like that." So you keep on running into this stuff all the time, and you do want to like have the kind of a better approach in the future, and you would hope the society would improve in the future, but uh, in the meantime, like, it's not necessarily easy for you to kind of take radical steps as just one person. uh, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you could take small steps, but like you run into this stuff all the time. Like, uh, to give you a small example, like, I was having this discussion about marriage with someone's parents, and they were saying like, oh, it's up to you to decide where she will live. It's up to you to decide where you will people go, and it's up to you to decide whether you will do this or that. And I was like, no, uh, it's not up to me. Like, the other person has a kind of her own identity, so I can't exactly make them uh, do something that they don't want to do. I can't exactly uh, uh, like, you can't exactly say, hey, we are moving to this city without first kind of discussing it with them, right? But you understand what I'm saying? Like, that's the message that comes from previous generation. And I have heard it over and over again from so many people. And then you might say, okay, you don't have to care about them then, but you kind of have to uh, then deal with women who grew up uh, in that kind of environment, and they themselves are kind of a bit inclined towards these kind of the gender roles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you have to kind of deal with them, uh, and so it's uh, it's really frustrating. You yourself may not want there to be those kind of fixed gender roles, but you are working in an environment where those things are the case. So uh, it can be quite it kind of, what I'm trying to say is, you can make improvements. It's a uphill struggle, but uh, uh, you then might end up having a marriage where you do have those kind of default gender roles, and then your friends might say, hey dude, what the f. But it's not possible for them to understand, like, uh, it's not always up to you. You know what I'm saying, John? Like, people grow up in a certain culture, and that's
Yeah.
what they are molded to be, and it's not always possible to change them. uh, you may want to change them, but they just might not be willing to entertain any other role.
Mm-hmm. And you may even have like the idea of what would be better for them, but they don't want to choose to do that because in order to do that, it throws away so much of their own culture that they've grown up with and have kind of been not acclimated to, but have been accustomed to.
Yeah, I think that is quite a statement you made. Yes, that is so I know, like, someone, like, I know Indians who are abroad, many of them, and so one category would be my friends who want to go there for the ideas and all the science and technology. So they are really excited about it. They will totally become Americans, and uh, uh, s- uh, no Americans in the kind of a ideological, what I'm saying, right? So
Mm-hmm.
those ideas of the individualism and all that, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all we want. Like, what do you care, John, if they don't watch football, right? So they, if they agree with the fundamental premises behind the Western civilization,
Mm-hmm.
and then I know all these other Indians who are abroad, and it is so frustrating to me that even over there they are still the same. Like, they choose not to uh, pick things up from uh, how do I say this? They still live there surrounded by Indians. Let me put it this way. That's their social uh, environment,
Mm-hmm.
and they prefer to hang out uh, with the non-Indians and have those non-conversations, and be part of that same culture, and which is obviously their choice. But uh, that does like give some weight to the statement you made about the culture, uh, because it has because it doesn't make any sense to me, John. Like if I was somewhere outside, I'd be like, uh, if I would hang out, I would hang out with those other people from the other culture or country, because like uh, you want to like explore, and like you want to see, what are these people up to, like how do they live, like you have grown up in a particular culture, so you know about it, like you, so what, I mean, go and explore some other culture. uh, it is so interesting thing to do. uh, and as far as I'm concerned, I'd be so excited to like see what kind of things these white people talk about when they are hanging out, right? To put you guys in the same bucket. So, and you are right, I mean, uh, that is kind of the thing, that how these liberals keep on calling uh, other people racist, but uh, it's the same thing from the other direction, John. What they don't understand is uh, a lot of people who are going to the West are also kind of not willing to be open minded about where they are going. You understand what I'm saying? They just want to keep their culture kind of closed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is somehow okay, uh, and it's not okay from the other direction. Because that's when the progress really happens, in my opinion. When you are not that closed, you are like open to exploration,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's an interesting point. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, I'm all talked out.
Already, even I had to take care of some things. So, all right.
I guess I'll finish up. Anyone that is listening to this, you may join us in our weekly conversations. That we have a calendar that has the dates for our meetings on Saturdays, and how to join them. All at the jordanbpeterson.community that has a host of all our different links that you can go to and uh, go through. Yeah, and check out our message boards if you want to start a conversation just through text, like in the meantime before our conversations that we have. So yeah, pleasure talking with you, Sumit. Talk to you later.
All right. Same here. Bye.
Bye.